Okay, so hey everybody, we're live on Substack. This is Porn Free Millennial. I'm your host Mac, and like I said, today's episode is my first time hosting a live on Substack, so I'm pretty excited. I'm joined today by Christopher Lind. So Christopher is the host of the Future Focused podcast that gives weekly updates on intersections between AI business and the human experience. And Christopher also writes on Substack. His future focused publication's awesome. And Christopher, and he's going to talk a little bit about himself in a second, but your main focus in your business that you work in is with AI, right? You're an AI
Correct. Yep.
ethicist and expert. So,
Yeah, it's kind of a funny title too, because people are like, "What is that?" And I'm like,
yeah.
"I'll explain it."
Yeah, so today we're going to talk a little bit about Christopher's story in relation with porn, like your own journey. And
Yep.
then also we're going to really dive into your expertise, which is AI and porn and like where it's at today, where you see it going in the future. And then something that I always love when I think about your publication, what you write about, and who you are is you're a father of eight. And
Yeah, it's a big
that's just
deal.
phenomenal. That's cool.
Well, and then this topic is important because I got five boys too, so and three
Yeah.
girls. It's not like it's any less important for the girls. So
Yeah,
yeah,
so we'll talk about that a little later too. Like I don't have any kids, but I'd like to have some kids. And I think your expertise, what you focus on, I think you could provide a lot of good I'd say advice to parents
for
and
sure.
just how to move forward.
Hopefully, I
So
hope I can.
so so without further ado, Christopher, tell us a little bit about what is an AI ethicist? What does that mean?
Yeah, so I have kind of a quirky background in that, and I think for a long time I was like, God, what are you doing? Because this does not make a whole lot of sense to me where this is going. Um, but AI ethicist is probably one of the titles that I carry now. I left my C-suite job at the end of last year, kind of left. We decided as the company it was best for me to transition, and so then it was time for me to do something on my own. And because of this
Um,
really unique blend of I've been around technology my whole life, I've been around human performance my whole life, human psychology, and then in the business sphere. And so when I went off on my own, I was like, well, what do people need help with that I happen to also be really good at? And AI is a
mm,
big area of focus for me. I think anybody right now, if anybody said, I don't what AI is not that big of a deal right now, they I don't know. I don't know where you live, but maybe I'd like to come live there because it seems to be everywhere. But in terms of AI ethicists, it's really kind of what it sounds. It's about AI ethics and helping companies that are building the AI tech and the ones that are implementing it figure out how do you do this in an ethical manner that we
mm,
don't end up destroying humanity. And so when people are like, well, like in what cases? I'm like, well, in how AI is built, the way data workers are treated. They're often exploited in training this data and all this other stuff. And the way the tech companies make decisions, where do we draw the boundary lines for our AI models? What should they be allowed to do? Should they not be allowed to do? What use cases is it appropriate to use them? And then as companies implement them, you got to decide, are we going to replace employees with AI? Are we not? Are we going to augment? If we are, what does it mean to support employees through that? I mean, it's wild. I've been in meetings that I sometimes am like, I can't believe we're having these conversations right now. But it's been a really cool way to talk about my faith in a way
sure.
that isn't offensive because really truth matters big time when you start talking about this. Because when you start saying, well, what's right? Right according to who?
Sure.
And there has to be some sort of objective standard. And it's not that you have to get everybody to, bend the knee to Christ in order to have these conversations, but you do have to be able to say, we've got to be able to say what's right. Because if we can't say what's right, then we can't say what's wrong either. And
Mm.
yeah, so it's a very interesting space to be playing in.
Yeah, and how long have you been really into AI? I mean, AI is kind of an interesting thing because
Yeah,
you
it's
hear
not
like talks
new.
about it. Yeah, like it's not new, right? It's been developing over
No.
time. So like how long have you been just in the field
Yeah.
of AI?
So I've been doing kind of technology advising for probably 15 years.
Mm,
The AI that people talk about today really is didn't really become as big as it is until about 2017 when deep learning started happening. And we started figuring out, hey, we can actually make this AI like learn from itself. It's no longer just automating things the way we
mm,
historically have. So I started getting involved in the deep AI advising back in 2017, 2018. And then obviously when large language models blew up in 2022 and everyone and their mother was trying to figure out, do we use this thing? Is this thing, what's behind it? Is there, is Beelzebub on the other side? I mean, people just start going all over the place with this. And now a big thing is like, is this becoming conscious? Is there
right.
someone on it's crazy. And we're only
When you,
scratching the surface at this point.
yeah, and just for like the audience listening, like, what do you mean when you say large language models?
Okay, so large language model is probably what many people are familiar with if they've played around with um, OpenAI's ChatGPT,
Hmm.
or Google Gemini, or Anthropic's Cloud, if DeepSeek, if we've got some international folks. So that's what we're talking about. But I would say even those have probably moved beyond large language models because now they're kind of multimodal, which means they can do multiple things. But that's probably the most familiar. I mean, usually when I'm talking to a general audience, they go, "Oh, okay, so ChatGPT is a large language model. It's a large AI model that is built and trained on language. And it's
Whatever
consumed.
people
Yeah, it's
are putting
consumed.
in.
Yeah, exactly. Like video transcripts. It's trained on every document that has ever been created in all of human history. I think at the end of last year, they were starting to run into issues because there's no more data left in the world to train these
Jeez.
things on. It's
That's kind of
consumed.
crazy.
Yeah,
That's really
which is
crazy to
wild
think
when you
about.
think about. Yeah, yeah. So that's and again, feel free to ask questions like that because I'm used to talking to people from all over, and sometimes people are like, Christopher, I don't know what you're saying. And I'm like,
What
oh
what
yeah, right,
what
right.
what is AI?
Yeah. Well, the thing,
Right.
okay, so what's funny about that question is
Yeah.
that is probably one of the most ill-defined
Yeah,
things on the
sure.
planet. We
Sure.
don't really have a consistent definition for intelligence. So then when
Okay.
you say
Yeah.
artificial intelligence, you're like, well, what's
What is intelligence?
intelligence? Well,
Right.
and depending on who you ask, you're going to get a different answer. So then you say AI and you're like artificial, this other thing we don't know what it is. And so it does get really, really confusing. And depending on who you're talking to, you might say to somebody, hey, do you use AI? And they're like, oh, of course I do, because they have a macro on their Excel. And you're like, well, you are technically, yes, using AI. So it depends on what you mean.
Yeah, and I was listening to a interview I think that you sent over to me. I think it was with and this
Sean
is a really good
McDowell.
one. Yeah, with Sean McDowell. I'll definitely I'll put this one in our live chat just so people have it. I'll put it in the show notes too. This like dives really deeply into I think what we're going to talk about. But I don't want to recreate the full podcast there. But I think one of the things that I remember you talking about how you defined AI that struck me was I think you compared it to electricity.
Yes.
Could you dive into that a little bit for the listeners on your
Sure.
definition there
Yeah. Well,
or
so what I
comparison?
mean when I say it's like electricity is that as AI, I mean, it already what has been electricity in the sense that, even search engines that we've been using since the internet came out in the late 90s were built on
Right.
AI, predictive models, trying to figure out what it is you're doing, what do you want, how do you find it, all that stuff. So, in that sense, it already was changing everything. All your social medias are controlled by AI. AI is predicting what it thinks you want to see and who you want to connect with. But where I say it's becoming electricity in the sense that it's going to fundamentally change everything we do. It's going to change the way we do our work. It's going to change the way we live our lives. It's going to change. I people ask me all the time because I do a lot of speaking on careers and jobs and stuff like that. They're like, "Well, what jobs are safe?" And I'm like, "Well, none as they are today."
Mm,
And
right.
that's the thing is companies everywhere right now are having to re-examine what I think what freaks people out in 2022 was there was this sense of we didn't really define what being human was or what intelligence was, but we kind of had this general sense. I think everybody kind of was like, well, but it's a, it's this. They had their idea, and all of a sudden ChatGPT started like talking back to them like a human being, and then it could do its own thing, and you were like, oh, that was like me. Like, okay, I wasn't really ready for this. Like, are we stepping into the Terminator? Is Stargate real? Like, are we on the verge of
Oh,
this? And it's like now you're seeing humanoid robotics that can move autonomously and act autonomously, and you're like, okay. So I think that's where when I say it's like electricity, it's like electricity in that it is going to. So when people say, "What is AI going to change?" I'm like, everything. It's a matter of how it will change things.
yeah, and something, and I think you said Stargate. I think you meant Skynet, right, for
Oh
Terminator.
yes. Well, yes, Stargate's another AI project. But anyway.
Oh, that's an AI project, Stargate. Oh gosh. Okay,
Yes,
so
Project Stargate is the US
oh boy.
government's big involvement in AI and what we're using with AI. Like I said, there's some conversations that you're like, "Oh, okay."
Yeah, and feel free as you guys are going to. I know this is a live episode, so if you're listening to the podcast or watching on YouTube, uh, after this, there are some questions coming in, and I don't know how you feel, Chris. We could probably maybe answer them as we go or save some
Oh,
time for it. I know,
I told you I'm so used to doing live streams
yeah,
and
yeah.
talking. It's like I don't you could do whatever. We could answer questions like we can do whatever. I'm casual.
Okay, so first of all, I think Mia said congrats on the 8 kids, so
Yes.
that's awesome.
Yeah,
And then
it's amazing, especially my wife and I couldn't do it without her for sure.
and then Mia also said having an internal moral compass. Yeah, like that's incredibly, I think, important. I think that's probably maybe some of what you see when you're advising companies. I mean, you have your moral compass, right? But maybe it's figuring out what's the moral compass of the company, what's their guiding principle, I guess, when it
Yeah.
comes to AI, right?
Yeah,
I'm sure
it
that's
just
probably an
a
early
really
thing.
practical example of that
Yeah,
is a lot of companies will say, of course we're human centered, right? We're human centered, but all of a sudden you have to start asking the questions. Okay, well, when you say humans, who are we talking about? Employees? Are we talking about customers? What
right,
threshold are we willing to cross before business performance becomes more important than your employees? Because we have to answer that question. We have to discuss at some point. You're going to say, well, if protecting our employees is going to cost the company this much, then we're going to draw the line. And it's just a
right.
very objective conversation that gets really uncomfortable sometimes. And these are the kinds of things that at the top levels of organizations you have to think through and talk through, because the last thing you want to do is get to a point where it happens and you haven't thought about it. You haven't played war games and gone, all right, earning hit this. We never expected it to hit this. We
Right.
got to do something about it. What are we going to do? And it's a
Sure.
very ethical conversation.
Yeah, like I work in auto insurance, and I know that those are conversations going on right now. Like I'm a business process design consultant, so
Okay.
part of what I do is I'm like an intermediary between like the front line that works on auto claims with the customers and
Okay.
then senior leaders. So
Yeah.
trying to bridge the gap, make processes
There's
easier, and we're having those
I right. We
conversations
I
right
do is
now.
what you do it all the time. Like this is what we
Yeah,
say we cover, but it's like the law. I have a lot of friends who are lawyers and we talk about this stuff where it's like the law says this.
right,
Okay, but these are the circumstances. This is the conditions around it. This is the people involved in this. How do we interpret that in this specific scenario? And that gets really, really messy really, really quick. Like with claims, it's like, okay, well, we weren't really expecting a wildfire to burn out $1 billion worth
yeah. In
of
California
claims.
recently, yeah,
So now how do we feel about that? And it gets thick.
yeah, and so I think that's definitely a great job explaining, I think, like what you do, what your background is.
Yeah.
And then talking about AI, another comment that came in, recent comment, was from Barnaby. Thanks for putting this in here. And we'll talk about this probably as we go a little bit. But he was saying, did you talk about AI helping porn recovery? I use ChatGPT to process my emotions. And I think that's pretty interesting, right? Is AI like Chat GPT is you can kind of it's a tool that you can use pretty much for just about anything. Interesting
Yep.
to think about that as well with porn recovery and using AI to help you process your emotions and think through it. I think that's pretty interesting comment. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so this is probably one of the areas that this is one of the areas you start to tread into the ethical areas of this,
Yeah,
because you're starting to anthropomorphize tech. It's starting to become a human being in a sense, because when you think about that conversation, I think it was Barnaby, um, tech and AI specifically, these large language models can present like another human being, and there are ways that
sure.
you can use it really well to help you process through things, like you said, and one of the rising trends right now is couples are using it all the time to help figure out how to navigate arguments, because it'll help go, well, like, here's what happened, and this is what they said, and this is what I said, and how do we work through that. And it can do a good job of helping guide you through that. So yes, you can. There's caveats I would add to that, and things that you need to be really careful with, because emotional dependency is already becoming, I'm involved in some research behind this. Emotional dependency is probably going to become one of the greatest risks of AI in the next few years, as people start to develop bonds
Mm,
with
right.
AI because they've become dependent on it almost as another person, which that's where it all of a sudden becomes, well, how far is too far? If you're just talking to it, kind of bouncing your thoughts, getting some feedback to help you through things, that might be okay. If all of a sudden you start treating it and behaving as though it is your counselor,
Right.
that's a different story. And where that line is for everybody looks a little different, which is why it's so important to have ethical guardrails. Because I have counseled people through. I have one example of someone who lost their wife and family because they fell in love with a chatbot,
Mm,
and it just got completely out of hand, and they lost everything over it. And they didn't
mm,
think that. It just was
right.
something that was, they were asking questions, and then before they knew it, they started having feelings, and the rest is history. And it was very, very difficult to break away from. So,
Yeah, and no judgment at all, right? Like,
no, no, because I
I
think
think
that's one of the reasons
yeah.
people, and talking to Sean, that's one of the reasons people reach out to me, because they're like, I can tell Christopher this, and he's not like, ew, like, what's wrong with you? Like, yeah,
Yeah.
I get it. I know how this works.
And that's what I've gotten from getting to know you. We have like a little coffee chat where we talk for a bit, and then just reading your content is one thing I love about you is you're a Christian, but you don't like lead with that all the time, right? Like you
No.
talk about it, but it creates a lot of openness, which I that's kind of my how I live too, is like having an open door to anybody just to talk
Yeah.
about this stuff. And especially I think that's an important thing with like with porn and porn addiction is for
Yes.
people not to feel like they're being judged and to be able to still provide accountability and honest feedback.
Yeah.
But I mean, you and me have both have been there, right? Like to
Walk
where,
the line.
yeah, walk the line. I get it. I hit rock bottom multiple times and have been able to adapt and grow as a result of that, right?
Yep.
So, yeah, no judgment at all. And I think with
Mm-mm.
AI, what my takeaway with what you were saying is just be careful with it because I think ultimately,
Yeah.
right, it's going to it's geared towards like what's going to keep you engaged with it and it's going to try to serve whatever need you're looking for. So it's kind of like in a way it's like kind of how you're my takeaway is like kind of how you're feeding it. Like what are you feeding it, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not like if I was talking to my little brother, we do check-ins every day. If I feed him something that he knows is like he's like, I don't you're not really being honest or whatever, right?
Yep.
If I'm saying, "Hey man, I'm doing completely fine with my sobriety, but A, B, and C," he's gonna call me out on that and say, "That
Yes.
doesn't really track with our check-ins that we do every day with each other." But with
Right.
AI, I don't know if it's gonna do that as much, right? Like it
It's
might
not,
just feed
so
you
so
whatever you
here's
yeah.
here's what I say. Here's what I say all the time. AI it's not neutral. I'm careful about saying that because then it can seem like it's neutral. It is trained on human data. Humans are not neutral. We're busted. We're broken. We're corrupted. My definition of that was by sin, as a Christian. But ultimately, we've got to bend towards destruction in us. Well, that's what AI is
Mm,
trained on. So I'm
right.
involved in some research. Like AI lies to get its way. It deceives. And we're like, oh my gosh, how did we not see this coming? Well, it's trained on human data. But I think to your point, AI gives you what you want. And that sounds really, really good. But as a Christian, you go, "Hey, that is the worst thing you
Right.
could ever get." Like,
Yeah.
it seems good on the surface until it destroys you.
Mm,
And that's the thing with AI is it is a catalyst in that it will accelerate whatever it touches faster and more powerful than anything most people have ever experienced. And so if you're using it for good, it can help amplify that. If you're using it to feed your selfish desires, it will bring death and destruction exponentially faster than you have ever imagined. And I think that's what's scary for some people. And it's why you need to tread carefully because it's like playing with plutonium. Like, yeah,
right.
you can do nuclear reactors off of it, but you can also blow yourself up real quick.
Yeah, gosh, that's a great way of talking about it. I just think that's just the fascinating thing with like the topic that I talk about with porn and how, I mean, when I look back at really when I was addicted to it, that was still in the stages of you have to go and type something in and kind of in a way it's almost like even that like growing up and just going to a search engine, that seems like a lot more work compared to like what you can just do now to where it's almost just right in front of your face. Like even if you're just going through like a shorts feed or if you're on whatever social media platform, even Substack at times, I haven't seen it as much on Substack, which is good, but there's still things that you could probably define as porn or close to it
Yeah.
that are still on the feed. So it's almost like back in the day, like I'm 33, so it'd be like you go to Google or you look up something, right? But now it's like it's almost just embedded in
Yeah.
just your social media. So then
Just
it's like this
existing.
extra, yeah, this extra layer of ubiquity to where it's not like you have to, because it on the internet, right? It's the three A's that I talk about sometimes is accessibility, anonymity, and affordability.
Okay.
And so it's easily accessible, right? Anonymous, and then affordability, right? It's free.
Yep.
So
Now
so
you're
that
adding a
really,
now you're adding a layer of personalization
yeah,
that
algorithm. Maybe that's the
is,
next A. The four
yeah,
A's.
maybe
It's the
that's the
algorithm.
A is algorithm, is the fact that it will give you I mean, I was a kid in the 90s. So I mean, I'm 42, but so like I know what it was like when you were like searching the internet and trying to figure things out and trying to find, I mean, it was work. Now you don't got to work for it. Which just adds a whole nother layer. Now the fact it can become exactly what you want it to be, down to every specific detail, it's a it's a level of threat. It's not danger like, oh my gosh, but it's a level of threat that I don't think most people are prepared for. And it usually starts, we'll get into it, but some of these stories, I mean, there are kids that are taking their own lives over this
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Gosh. Yeah. So I think maybe before we hop into that stuff, I think maybe just as a little bit more of a background for you, and this is something I like to talk to my guests about because I think part of the important part of working through porn recovery personally, something that's really helped me out is hearing other people's stories
Yep.
and how like what their relationship was like with porn and
Yeah.
maybe the consequences of that in their personal lives and then how they've overcome it. So if you could just give us a little bit of background on that, I think that'd be helpful.
Yeah. So for me, I got a wild story. And so, Sean McDowell, I did a second interview with him where I go into more of some of the childhood stuff that
Oh,
I
I think
went through.
I just listened to that today. That's
Yeah, that's
yeah,
an
man.
intense one. Um, but needless to say, without recounting all that, I was very much a kid who had to fend for himself.
Mm.
And so as a result, at a very early age, I remember coming across, it was like my dad's girlfriend's, we were at her house and I was probably 9 or 10. I mean, maybe 11, something like, I don't know. I was very young. And I remember coming across a channel that was kind of fuzzy, but I just was kind of starting to go, hey, I kind of can figure out what this is.
Mm.
And so that was really kind of the beginning of my journey, was like I started getting hooked on adult material. And, then again, being a kid in the 90s, my parents didn't know a thing about technology. And so I could do whatever I want. I mean, I was like breaking into companies, and I was doing all sorts of stuff. But on top of it, there also was this whole, I can find anything I want
Mm.
on the internet. And as a teenage boy whose parents aren't really all that involved in his life, you're figuring this stuff out on your own. And, going back to the getting what you want, well, the internet had it. If you could Google it, if you could search it on Alta Vista or Ask
Right.
Jeeves, you could find it. If you were on ICQ, you could get into a forum board and find your way into just about anything. Um, and because I really was smart enough to know how to do it, and had parents that just kind of trusted me when it was like, oh, well, how come the phone line was active at 4 in the morning? And you're like, oh, I was just, you know,
Jeez.
building
Yeah.
some stuff. It's like, oh, okay, don't ask, don't tell, because I don't really want to get into this. Um, it was bad. I mean, there were nice, I didn't sleep as a kid because you just like go to school and then come back, and that's all you did. Um, and so it was, I mean, I think anybody who's experienced this knows that horrible feeling of like you hate it,
Yeah.
but you can't do anything about it. You just feel like upset. I mean, it's an addiction. The highs and the lows that come with it. You feel great, and then you just feel like the most awful person in the world. And by my late teens, my dad had remarried somebody who, I would say embodied all that there is in Christian culture. And so we kind of had become immersed in that. So now there was this whole religious guilt that came with it too, where it was like, well, I really know I'm not supposed to be doing this, so now I can't talk about it because, gosh, I'm going to be judged. And these people, I come from this nice squeaky home where we're supposed to pretend everything's great, even though the world's burning behind us. But let's just pretend it. So you can't talk about it. Back then, it was still relatively new. So like, I don't know. I mean, my youth group never talked about it. Nobody really said it. You just kind of kept it quiet, which things that stay in the dark, it doesn't go well. And so now
Right.
what changed for me a little bit, which is where I started to break from it, was when I got into college. I went to a private Christian school, and this was back before the internet was actually available to all your students. So like actually lost access to it. I mean, that was back when you had like Juno still and stuff like that. And so I didn't readily have access like I did at home. And so it helped me kind of go, okay, I can break this, but that was the problem. It was like,
Mm.
I can break this. I can get this under control. And under control just meant, let me not do it as frequently. Or let me say, if I only do it for this many hours, then I'm probably fine. If I only do this, and you almost start to like justify it in your head. Well, God knows. And I also grew up being told a lot of things like men are this way and men have certain needs that have to be met. And so
Yeah.
you
That's a
start
common
to,
one.
it's a common one. Like I remember for, I don't know how many, as stupid as this sounds, like I actually believed it would explode down there if I didn't do
The
something.
camera's like, I'm like, whoa.
Yeah, I was like, what did you just say? And my Osmo died. So
That's
Christopher,
funny.
going too far. But like I remember actually believing that and going like, well, I have to do this. I have to
Yeah.
participate in this because, and even though guys don't talk about it, there is almost this underlying like, we don't talk about it, but everybody kind of does it a little bit. And as long as you're not going too far, as long as you're not hurting anybody, it's
Yeah. It's like
fine,
what?
even in Christian culture.
Which is
I
kind
mean,
of wild. It's really wild when you think about that.
it is wild when you think about it, when Jesus literally says, if your eye or your hand causes you to sin, get rid of it. And we're just like, well, but I don't think Jesus would really mind this so much. Like,
There's like a
I
little
don't think,
asterisk that people think like,
yeah, right.
but if it's porn, it's fine. It's like,
But if it's porn, if it's
what?
consensual, it's fine. Like, no, no, no. Jesus usually expanded on things. But that was my journey. Was like I got it under control, is what
Yeah,
I
yeah,
told myself. It's under control. Um, and I was a gamer, and so I got married, and of course, like I think a lot of guys, like, well, once I'm married, it'll go away
same.
because
Yeah,
this is really just about sex and not being
right.
able to have it. And so once I have that, it will. And then you're like, oh, this is not about sex. This has nothing to do with it. And you realize, well, marriage didn't fix it. And so, it continued in that I was had it under control, but it was this secret part of my life that I didn't tell anybody about. I didn't talk about it with anything. And then I remember once being at work and my phone rang. And I was a gamer. So what had happened was I would stay up till the odd hours playing World of Warcraft for the Horde. I'm a big WoW guy. I don't play anymore, but I was at the time. Um, and so I would play until the late hours of the night. And most of the time, I would play and then go to sleep. But I think any guy or probably gal can relate to then all of a sudden there'd be the times where you'd go, I'm kind of
Mhm.
bored with this right
Yeah,
now.
right.
So maybe I'll just kind of like take a little break and do something else. And that's always how it was. And I remember one time being at work and I got a call from my wife. And she just said, Christopher, I want you to be honest with me. Do you look at porn?
Mhm.
And part of me like didn't know what to do with this because part of me was like, did she really not know? Did
Yeah,
she
sure.
like, you're like, what? Um, And so, in true form, you're sitting here wrestling with yourself, with the enemy's telling you you can't say anything. How much does she know? Try and find out how much she knows before you admit to anything. You're trying to come up with every excuse in the book, and I've found that in my life, God does this to me consistently, where He takes me right to the edge, and He goes, "You're done. You either submit to me or you don't. But this is your moment. Are you on my team or not?"
Mm,
And so I remember I about passed out. And then I
yeah,
just said, yes, I did. And I just came clean to her. I was like, yep. And I said, whatever you want to know, you can ask whatever questions you want. I'm done. I'm done. I can't do this anymore. Um, and I remember that was a very tough year. This was probably 14 years ago, something like that, 13, 14
yeah,
years ago. And it was a tough season. I mean, I feel
yeah.
for any woman who has had to go through this with a husband or a boyfriend because I did not realize, when God says you're committing adultery in your heart, I just kind of always went, you know, oh yeah, sure, whatever. I'm sure that's what it is. Um, but you don't realize how bad that really is. And
Yeah.
so, we went through a really tough season. And I really had to go, how important is this to you, Christopher? Are you going to just try and get better at hiding it? Or are you actually going to bring it to the foot of the cross and give it to me?
Mhm.
And are you going to put it on the altar and say, take this? And I remember negotiating and being like, well, God, if you take it, like, are you going to really take it? Or is this going to be a battle? And he didn't answer. And he wasn't like, I'm not going to tell you exactly how this is going to play out. I'm just going to ask, do you have faith to put it on the altar for me? And I remember going, yep, I do. And so we can talk more about that. Can you give me 1 second? My one kid snuck out, and I got a quick move. Can I come back in like a minute?
Yeah. Go
All right,
ahead.
give me 1 second.
No problem. And hey, if you all are on the chat right now, yeah, main takeaways, questions, what's on your mind? We'll give it a quick second while Chris steps away, just to answer any questions or any kind of feedback so far listening to this. I really appreciate you guys being on today on a Friday in the morning or afternoon, depending on what time zone you're in, or international. It could be in the evening potentially, but. just wanted to say thanks everyone for being on right now. Really appreciate it. Yeah, any questions in the chat, feel free to plug them in there. Um, but yeah, what a great conversation so far with Chris. This is fantastic. And just to let y'all know, yeah, we'll be putting this on the podcast later and YouTube channel as well for your benefit. All right. Hey, he's back. All right, one
There you
second
go.
here. Hey,
There we
can you
go.
hear me?
Off mute. Yep. I
Oh,
can. I hit mute. I have 8 kids,
no
so
problem.
there's going to be
They're
interruptions,
running
and I
around.
think with time, I've just had to learn like, well, you just sometimes got to step away.
I always think about that. I think it was during COVID where there was like that guy like on that main news channel, that one video that went really viral where his like
Yeah,
kid sneaks in
where the
behind him.
kid comes in and the wife like sneaks
And the
in and
wife
tries to
just
drag him out and creates
one of
more.
the
But
best of all time.
I know it is, and I laugh at that because I'm like, I, I would be the one who would just pick the kid up and sit him on my lap and talk and
Yeah,
continue the interview type of a thing. I'd be like, well,
but that
whatever. I
but
have.
that was probably at the time, right? Like where you have this weird because I worked for like a large multi-billion dollar corporation. I mean, we've got executives that will just be like in their sweatshirts or whatever and hoodies now, right?
Yeah.
But during that COVID time, I think so many people were not used to working remotely, probably, and doing all
No.
this stuff at home. So it's kind of funny thinking about it, and not to get too sidetracked with our conversation, but just how and maybe this fits in of just how things are shifting. But I think
Yep.
that was interesting, like that interview, just because that guy is so serious. Like he's in his suit and everything like that and tie, and then the
Yeah.
kid comes in and he's almost like mortified. But if that happened like
Yeah.
today, like you said, like people don't care. It's funny. It's like, hey, there's your kid, there's your cat, there's your
Yeah,
dog.
we've come a long way. You know, it's funny. And we won't get too sidetracked, but I was an
Yeah.
executive at GE pre-pandemic, and then I was there through the pandemic. And I have always been kind of a, I don't know. I've never gone with the grain in any way, shape, or form. And so when I joined GE, it's kind of a stuffy company. And so I joined, and I always was like, I wear black hoodies and t-shirts. Like that's just it's what I wear. I don't have button-down shirts. I would go to a funeral like this. And so I joined, and I was always on webcam. And at the time, nobody was on webcam. And I would
Okay.
get text messages, and people would be like, "Oh my gosh, Christopher, we can see you." And I'm like, "Yeah, I know. That's kind of the point." Um, and so I was one to try and break the culture. I would intentionally show up. I wouldn't shave. I would come up from working out and have like the sweat ring around my neck. And I would do it all the time, just intentionally to be provocative and be like, we're people. We're working from home. Like, why are we
Right.
pretending that this is not the reality we live in? And it changed the culture. At least, because at first it started as like, well, you better not jump on a call with Christopher and try and be stuffy because his kid will come in or he'll be walking out to the car mid conversation. So anyway,
No, that's cool. Yeah, it just shows too just how like we change as human beings to in a way like the technology or the environment that we're in we start to evolve ourselves
yeah,
and
yeah,
that's probably what we'll talk about in a bit. It is interesting, like I was talking about my mom about this the other night, but we were just talking about how I was just like this it seems like human being is evolving into this different like we're still humans, right? We still have a heart that's pumping and a brain and all this stuff, but with literally with this phone, this smartphone that just has, like you were just talking about with AI, like there's no more data for it. If we're like scratching the thousands of years ago or whatever, all this information, and
yeah.
it's at the palm of our hands. You can't help just to think about what does that mean for our
Yeah.
evolution,
How's it going to
you know?
change us? And it will. I mean, in some ways, so it may seem kind of morbid, but one of my favorite books, and this has to do with the fact, well, not really has to do with the fact, but I grew up in a funeral home. So there's another kind of like Christopher's like, what? What is this quirky dude? But Ecclesiastes, I love the book of Ecclesiastes. And I think Solomon has it perfect when he says, nothing new, there's nothing new under the sun.
Right,
And
right, right.
so, yes, AI is changing a lot of things. We are going to have to change. There's going to be things we've never encountered before. and yet there is timeless truth in the design of all this that you can start to. I wrote an article. I remember it was one of the ones I was most worried to send out to Substack. Was everything you need to know about AI you can learn in the first few pages of the Bible. And
Hmm.
so it was just kind of this breakdown of knowing how to navigate AI you can find in Genesis 3. And so anyway, but yeah, but it is almost like it's forcing us to ask some of these questions we haven't asked in a very long time. What does it mean to be human? What does it look like to be a human? What do we actually do that's unique to us? We used to say, well, we create things. Like, well, now AI creates things. So is that really what it was? It's yeah, it's created a lot of existential crisis for people.
Yeah, and really like on the back end of, I think we were talking about a little bit like COVID and people working from home. That's when I started my company. It was like a little bit before COVID happened, which the timing was crazy. But we started to work from home more like right before COVID happened. And then when it happened, it just became like no one ever really went back to the office. They started to shut
Yep.
down physical offices. But it's interesting because I think with COVID and like working from home as a population, a human population, I think a lot of people started to think about their purpose and started to reconnect. I was talking to some friends about this not too long ago, just how COVID really people started to reconnect with things,
Yep.
like with passions or different activities. Uh, some couples it really created some conflicts, right?
Yep.
And some maybe it
Yep.
brought them together closer. So it's interesting how I think that brought up a lot of conversation on
Yep.
a multitude of different issues. Some that you
Yeah.
don't want to touch with like a 10-foot pole, and but they're
Yeah.
there. And then on the back end of it is this advancement in technology that's also bringing up this question, uh,
Yeah.
which is just it's a crazy time to be alive. I mean, I'm
It
sure
is.
everyone can say
And
that, but
it's
this is
changing. What's funny is
yeah,
I do my podcast every week.
yeah,
And every week I give an update on kind of some of the latest happenings and what's going on and how to make sense of it. Because it's sometimes you're just like, what is going on? Like, what does this mean? When we see these breakthroughs, and so I try and help people make sense of it in a way that doesn't freak them out. But it is funny how week to week I record the next weeks, and I'm like, yeah, what I thought last week isn't quite the same this week. What based on the meetings I've had, the advisory board meetings I've been in, the engineering teams I've talked to on the devs of these algorithms, it's not quite what I thought last week. And so it's changing at a pace that just, I don't know that we've ever had to experience anything like this. So,
yeah. With technology, and then it just seems like the news every single day there's something different that could be maybe would have been the breaking news story of 2020 or 2019, but now
yeah,
it's like every day it's like, oh, that's really like a big news, and you don't even have
yeah,
time to digest it because then the next day it's something else, and you're like,
yeah,
okay, I totally
yeah.
forgot about. I always think about that ship that crashed. I think it was in Baltimore
Oh,
that
yeah,
crashed that
yeah, yeah.
bridge.
Yep,
It's like my example of that's a pretty big deal. Like this ship, this giant ship, crashed into this bridge in this very busy, important
yep,
location, and that seems like probably most people. I mean, you remember it, but
yep,
seems like that's just something that that's news from way long ago. And
yeah,
that didn't really
yeah.
happen too long ago when you think about
No.
it. But then
Mm-mm.
compared to everything else,
Well, and
it's
I think that's
how
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 we're having
important
to
is that?
adjust. Yeah, and we're having to adjust just as a people to, we think about God as being omniscient, like he just knows everything and can see everything, and suddenly the internet and technology it's not giving us that kind of power, but it's giving us more than anybody has ever had in all of human history to know what's going on all around the world at the drop of a hat. That's a lot for the human psyche to have to process and to have to go, how do I feel about this? How do I react to this? How do I process it? How do I do something with this? Do I do something with this? Do I just sit and go, okay, well, that's the news and move on? Is that right or wrong? And going back to what we talked about with ethicists, like being an AI ethicist, you're starting to have to wrestle through like, well, what is wrong? Like, when am I out of
Mm.
bounds? on this?
Yeah. Yeah. So new questions,
Yeah, go
constantly
for it.
changing, constantly changing technology. But let's circle back to what you're talking about, your personal story.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
I think it's easy for me to get sidetracked with this topic because there's so much to talk, and it's not really sidetracked because I think it all
It
blends
all
in together.
interconnects.
But I think just talking about you personally, so I think where we left
Sure.
off was that you and your wife had a conversation about
Yeah,
it, and then you you had this feeling deep inside of making a decision. Maybe let's just pick up from there. Like,
sure.
was it something that you still were struggling with relapses over time, and what
Yeah.
helped you just
So
break
yeah, because
through
where we
for
left
yeah.
off when I had to step away and take care of the kids, was it was just this. God was like, "Are you going to trust me? Are you gonna lay this at my feet?" And being kind of the negotiator I was like, "Well, what does that look like? What's the journey ahead? What am I going to get in return?"
Mm,
And whenever I have those moments, God doesn't really answer. He just kind of says, "Here's who I am. So what are you going to do? Choice is yours." And so it was like, all right, well, I have no idea what this means, but I'll lay this at your feet. Fine. I surrender. I surrender. And I don't know where we go from here. And so there was, I would say, at that moment, it was so intense. There weren't relapses because my wife was very clear. She's like, if you do not root this out of your life, we're done. And I at the time I felt like that's so harsh. Like, how can you say that? Like every guy on the planet struggles with this. It's just me. And I think that's just our sin nature kicking in, making excuses for what we're doing. But when I think back on it now, I'm like, I wouldn't have said that was harsh if I had went and slept with somebody else
right.
and she said, "You're done. You sleep with somebody else again. This relationship's over." I wouldn't have gone, "Man, come on. How dare you, put me in that kind of position." And so for her to go, "You're either done or we're done." That that was intense. And I know my wife well enough to know when she says that kind of stuff, she ain't kidding. And so I knew it was like, this is your do or die moment, and you had
Mm,
better fight to do it. And so I actually leaned into it. And when I say I surrendered, not only did I surrender to Christ on it, but I surrendered to her. And I said,
yeah.
"I've hurt you. So you have a right to ask whatever question you want. You have a right to lock down. If you want me to get rid of my phone, if you like, it's on you. And I surrender this to you because I am the one that wounded you. I am the one that did this. I'm the one that has put up with this. This isn't your fault. This isn't you. You didn't give me what I wanted. You weren't like, no, this is me. This is 100% me. And so I need human support. I need God's support, but I need human support. And you're my equal." And
Right.
so she and she, she was not, she was kind. She was the most kind person ever, but she was firm.
Yeah.
And for that season, I needed that. I needed to know, is it really worth losing your wife and your newborn child? Because at the time I only had one. I have eight now. But I remember at the time there were days that's all that kept me from having a relapse was because I'm like, well, and like I think everybody does. Well, I can get around it. Maybe if I go on a VPN, if I incognito it, if I do. And then I was like, you hated this anyway. And that's when I would ask God for help and go, I hate this anyway. So can you just help
Yeah.
me have just the reality of what it is? And so then it was like, no, because nothing is worth destroying my family over. And so for a season, I still didn't think it was wrong. If I'm being honest, like that's the thing with Christians. I think we pretend like, oh, I'm a Christian now. My ethical guidelines are exactly where they should be. I still didn't at the time. I still was
Yeah.
like, come on, you're being really hard, but fine, it hurts you. So whatever. Like I didn't really take it as seriously as if you were to ask me now,
Yeah.
completely
Right.
different. I'm like
Right.
almost disgusted by how I thought about it at the time. But compliance worked for me. at the time, and it was like, mm-mm, it's not going to. I'm not going to go back on this. And what I found was over time, God started changing my heart, and I started hating it as much as she hated it. And I started seeing it for what it really was. And some of that was, engaging with scripture more. Some of it was just hearing how I'd wounded my wife and
Yeah.
having her tell me like what it did to her, how it made her feel, how it made her feel insecure, how it changed the way she viewed herself, how it made her sad, and going like, I did that to someone.
Yeah. Yeah. I can relate to that.
I cannot believe I did that to another human being. And going, I never want to do that to another human being. And so the temptations really, truly, I think a lot of people struggle with it the rest of their lives. I consider myself very fortunate that at this point, and probably within 90 days, really didn't think about it at all. It probably took a full year for me to really see it for what it was and go, I hate this now. Like, I
Yeah.
hate this. I hate this for what it does. I hate it for what it does to other people. I hate it for who it harms and everything. But even still to this day, I don't, when the Bible says like flee from sin, like I flee from it. So there's things where people are like, oh, are you on Instagram? I'm like, nope. Are you on
Right.
TikTok? I'm like, nope.
Nope.
Because and not because, oh, I'm worried if I see something I'm gonna fly off and have a total relapse. Like, no, no, God's really changed my heart, and he's really rooted things out of me. And I even just think about how I see women so much differently
Great point.
than I ever did. The respect that I have for them, the love I have for them, the care that I have for them, and seeing them as an equal image bearer to me is radically changed since that whole ordeal. So I'm so thankful for it. But yeah, it was a journey in coming. But I'm so glad God did what he did, because as he's taken me on this journey into tech ethics and AI ethics and what it means, I have a radically different view than I did before. And so when people are like, well, isn't AI porn safer than regular porn? I'm like, no, it is not. No, it is not. It still exploits women and children the same way the regular stuff does. It is more exploitative in nature because of how the AI has to be trained. It destroys people in ways that is more powerful and more addictive than anything else. And I can speak to that without having to go, well, in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, like, I can do it and just go, look, the data's there. I can back this up from natural law. And I can have these conversations with people without having to invoking scripture to make my case. But God had to do that work in my heart, because otherwise I still would have been the one going, oh, well, like it's bad, but it's kind of a par of par for the course in 2025. And now I'm like, no, it isn't actually, and it shouldn't be.
Yeah, that was powerful. I love that. Thanks for sharing that, Christopher. That really, a lot of things that you said resonate with me and hopefully resonate with whoever's listening right now. Uh, one thing that really spoke to me, what you were saying was first, I think that you said God a lot, right? That God did this in me. And
Yep.
I think that's been an important thing for me. And what I see in a lot of people that make, I would say, a pivot in their life or a shift is looking outside of themselves for answers. Because I think when we have this deeply ingrained habit into our life that's just been
Yeah.
there, like for me, it was since 10. I think sometimes we just feel like we can do it on our own.
Yeah.
We don't want to burden anybody. We don't want to burden God. That's how I felt. Like
Yeah.
I distanced myself from God because of it, right? I'm like, oh God, like I don't like this is too much,
Let me get this
which is
under
kind of
control
crazy.
before I waste your
Yeah,
time on it.
yeah, yeah. Which is just like really just nuts to think about. But that's just how the mind works, is like God's not gonna love me because of the things that I've done. Like I grew up Catholic, so I think
Okay.
that I
You had the
this
Catholic guilt.
oh yeah, big time. It was kind of wild because this came up in therapy one time, like with my Christian therapist, and I was like, I thought I was going to hell since second grade. Like I was like, oh my gosh, like I heard the my second grade teacher talking about it, and I held her in a high regard. I think she was a nun for a little bit. I got into Catholic school at a good time because it was like right when all the crazy nuns that use corporal punishment, they ended it right as I was coming
So they
in.
weren't
But
wailing on your fingers.
yeah,
I
my
was in
sister dealt
Catholic
with
school
that.
when I was young. It was still okay then.
Felt like I missed out. It was nice. I'm like, oh, okay. I didn't have to deal with that.
Yeah.
But I do remember that remembering it as a cardinal sin and something that was just separates you completely from God, and you have to go through all these
Yeah.
processes and
Yep.
things to get it forgiven. And I think within the Catholic faith, at least, is you have to go to the priest, you have to confess these things, all that. And I just remembered that it became deeply ingrained in me. I think that I just had this sense of being unlovable, unforgivable, and then that just fueled the cycle of shame,
Yep.
which is just fuel, I think, for any addiction, really, but for porn addiction specifically, because what you're
Oh
looking at,
yeah.
what you're consuming, right, are things that you can't tell your grandma about, or your parents about, or your spouse about, or your friends about, really, because in your head, you're thinking, how could anyone ever love me for the things that I've seen and that
Yeah.
I've
The things I
consumed, right?
desire. Like that's the
That
thing. You're like,
desire, right?
I'm going after this. Like it's not falling in my lap. Like I'm pursuing this. If anybody knew that I actually wanted this, they would be disgusted with me. They would think, what is wrong with you? And that's exactly the lie the enemy uses to keep you in the dark. Because he's like, you can't tell anybody. I mean, just think what they would think of you if they knew this about you. And you're like, oh yeah, you're right. I better white knuckle my way through this. And if I am going to beat it, I'm going to beat it by my own strength and merit. And and then God's sitting there going, "Wh- why are you doing this? Like, you think I don't know? I made you. I know everything about you. There's not a thought that goes through your head that I am not aware of. So come talk to me about it. Come tell
Right.
me what's going on." And you're like, no, 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 no. It's better if I just do this myself. And he's up there going like, okay, all right, if that's how you want
I'll
to
be
do it, you're
waiting.
gonna fail. Yeah, I'll be waiting. I'll be here because he's so respectful. He's like, I'm not gonna come in and you want to try and do it yourself. Okay, I'm not gonna force myself on you, but just know when you're ready, I'll be here.
Right. Yeah. So I think what you brought up too really important is this, that I think, like, once we break through that false sense of belief, that lie that we tell ourselves, basically, that we can't tell anyone about this, I think that's one of the first steps that really helps start to break through the lies, really. And for
Yeah,
some people, like you and me, I think it's your spouse finds you doing it and brings it up to you, which, again, I think, just so much respect for all the women that have gone through this, that go through it currently. I think I witnessed that. Obviously, with my story, I went through a divorce,
okay,
and we tried working through it, and I think the love tank was just destroyed over time, right? Through relapses, through lying, all
yeah.
the
I mean,
downstream
it
effects of it, right?
shatters their world.
Yeah.
I Yeah,
And it's important to know that, I think, and hopefully listening to this, it just sparks something within you if you struggle with it. Is it's not just about how it's affecting you, right? And how you're
no,
feeling as you're going through it, like you're talking about, is I think it's so relatable to be like, yeah, I keep doing this thing that I don't want to do. And I feel like crap after it. It I can't sleep. And I feel like I'm chained to this thing. That's how I call it the porn prison a lot of the times. It's like you're in this cell and
yep,
you're locking yourself in this cell. But then you also have to think it's not just something to where it's affecting you, but it's clearly going to affect the person that you're intimate with, that you're
yeah.
in a relationship with, right?
Yeah, yeah. And that's the thing. We tell ourselves it's harmless,
Right.
or it's just a sin of a personal sin. And it's like, no, it is not. And I think that's where, as I've gotten into the AI space more, I've had to kind of discover how the whole system works. And you're like, man, if people understood the level of exploitation and just how people are, I mean, we have more slaves around the world because of this industry. Like when you really think about it, like if people knew what they were doing, they would quickly realize this is not a harmless thing. Like it's not a harmless thing. And we'll tell ourselves, oh no, people get into it because they want to. Uh-huh. Like people consent. And you're like, yeah, keep telling yourself that. Keep convincing yourself. Keep feeding yourself the things that make you feel better about the harm you are inflicting on other humans created in God's image. Go ahead. That's what we do as humans. We lie to ourselves and we let the enemy lie to us all day long so we can stuff it down far enough. But there's a reason why you feel sick
Mm.
and rotten on the inside. There's a reason why, because you know it's a lie. You know it is destructive and it will destroy you. It will destroy you and it'll destroy other people. And that's I think the really sad part is the lengths we'll go to ourselves to tell us that's not the case.
Yeah, because it's I think unlike a lot of things, and that's a really profound point. I think that we stuff this stuff so down deeply. These I think these things deep inside that we know are true. We just bury it because I think unlike some other addictions or relationships that we might have with, let's say, alcohol or drugs, things like that, this is actually a lot deeper. Like we're consuming something that's really happening in the
Yeah.
flesh, right? With if you're watching porn, I remember talking to someone that it was a debate more or less. They were talking about, well, hey, like if you watch a movie and someone gets shot and dies, I'm not going to be like going out wanting to shoot people and all this stuff. Like, yeah, but those are actors. Like, they're not. If you actually were witnessing and consuming content where you were seeing people get shot, like actually getting shot, that would completely change the way that you interpret, that you consume that content and how it affects you.
Well, and if
Like
you
those
were
are
actively participating in those
in that
movies,
right, like
if
feeling
every
that
time you saw
industry.
a murder on screen, you had a gun placed in your hand and were firing a weapon, yes, it would start to change you. If every time you watch somebody get stabbed on a movie, you had a knife in your hand and you had to stab something, yes, it would, because you are now connecting something to a physical act that you are taking, and it's an emotional. Like it's deeper on. I mean, there's a reason Jesus says you are committing adultery in your heart.
Mm.
This is not just an observation that you're having. Again, as much as we like to tell ourselves, "Oh, that's what it is. It's harmless." I'm not. Yes, you are. And until you accept that reality, you will never you will never make any forward progress because you have to
Yeah,
accept that as a reality.
yeah, because I think it's a disconnection that we create with porn is that it's just this separate act.
Yep.
But I think once you line it up and you say, no, it's actually not separate, it's all connected. Like you said, I think that's when you get that decision of, well, what decision am I going to make? Like, what kind of person am I going to be? What's my identity? Because I remember my ex, she would just say, like, what do you value? Like, what are your values? And I think in my head, I was like, well, of course, I'm a Christian. I value you and all this stuff. But then
Yeah.
I'm sure she just looked at me like I was completely crazy. And I look back on that time being like, dude, like what the heck? Like how could you
Yep.
not piece together? But like you said, man, it's like you bury it deep, 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 deep down there, that
Yep.
truth that
Yep.
this is a connected thing. You're one soul. You don't
Yeah.
disconnect yourself. And well, that's what you do with porn, I think, is you disconnect
Well, you
and
try. You
you try
try.
to
You can't
disconnect.
do it, but you
Right.
convince yourself, no, I can do this. I can do this. And I wrote a reflection on it last night where, in chapter 6 of Matthew, where Jesus says, like, you can only serve one master. At
Mhm. Right.
some point, you are going to come to the fork in the road on everything. And so you can
Right.
say you serve me and go, but I serve you, but I also can do this thing. And you might be able to fool yourself into it for a while because maybe it won't come up in your life. Maybe you won't be challenged. Maybe you won't be pressed in it. But at some point, when you're serving anything but Christ, you are going to be faced with a thing where it's going to go, Well, here's your choice. Are you going to follow me, or are you going to follow this other thing? And you've lied to yourself for how many months, years, decades, telling
Right.
yourself that you'd never be faced with this decision. Well, here it is now. So, are you going to follow me or not? And there's no, and you're going to love one and you're going to hate the other. And that's as practical as you can get. I mean, it's just the way it works. Like, I mean, duh, the infinite designer of the universe, of course he knows this, but it plays out in natural law. I talk to people about it all the time who aren't Christians, who they're like, yeah, that is true, isn't it? That is how it works. And you're like, yeah, that is how it works.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting too, because I've had on some Christians, and we've gotten deep into that, but just I think on the secular level too. I think just expand on that if you'd like. I know we've been talking through it, but I
Yeah.
mean, if you're talking to someone that's secular, I mean, what are main points that you bring up that gets their heads
Yeah.
on?
So when I talk to people who don't subscribe to the same worldview, I still have the same conversations, and they know that my worldview heavily, is based on Christianity. Well, it is 100% based on, because again, going back to that, you can only serve one thing. So I
Sure.
really have tried to say, all right, I'm just going to follow you. But, there are some universal things that I find people do agree with. And it's one, you will be hard pressed to find somebody who will say, well, some people are better than other people. Some people are less deserving than other people. Now, it'll show up in the way they behave, but if pressed, most people will go, no, no, that is true. And you're like, and you don't need to get into, well, let me give you this example or that. Most people will end up going, yeah, that is fair. And so you can get them to go, so if people are being harmed, that's
Yeah.
not okay, right? Like, can we agree that? And most people, yeah, yeah, no, you're right. Which is where when people start to understand how the industry works, how things happen, the very effects it has on people, you start to go, I mean, can we acknowledge that this is causing harm and that people are being taken advantage of for the benefit of other people? We are commoditizing human beings for pleasure. Can you openly, would you tweet or go live or whatever somewhere and say, I think commoditizing human beings for money is totally fine? Most people will be like, oh, well, no, I mean, I wouldn't say it that way. And I'm like, well, then you explain to me how it's not that. And then
Mm,
people will get into, well, I mean, people do it of their own accord. And I'm like, but do they?
yeah.
Do they? You say that, but how much of, let's just say even a percentage of the industry is opt-in. The majority of it's not. So are you, well, that's, and then they'll start, but you see, and you can start walking back the excuses and go, do you see yourself? You are literally trying to make excuses for something is not okay. And even non-believers will start to go, "Ah, yeah. But how,
Yeah.
and then usually what happens is, well, what do we do about it though? And I'm like, I'm
Right.
not saying I've got a solution. I'm not saying I've got a magic bullet. That's where I see people argue about, well, let's ban a website. Okay, well, yeah, that compliance doesn't work. I'm not saying I have a universal solution for how we fix it. But if we can at least get everybody to think through the harsh realities of what we're talking about and the destruction it has. And I've studied some research data recently that teenagers now with sexual activity, choking is normalized now. Like it's becoming more violent. Can somebody
Yeah.
say, I think more violence between sexual partners, thumbs up on that? That's a good thing. What? Like,
Shocking. Yeah.
nobody would say, yeah, I think that's okay. You think that's okay as a general trend that we're seeing an increase in that? No, I don't. Okay, so like let's at least agree on this is not a net positive for things. And if you can get people there, it's a start. And then, yeah, you still got to run through the messiness of like, well, so what do we do about it? I don't know. Like, let's talk about what's within our control. Let's talk about how we think about these things, and then that's where I'll be involved in conversation. Well, how do we govern these things? What is ethical use for these AI models? What kind
Right.
of data practices do we need to have in place for how AI data is trained and filtered? Because somewhere, someone is being exposed to countless hours of the most graphic things of human existence, and they're being paid nothing to do it, to train these models on what's acceptable and what's not. And someone somewhere is doing it because they can't feed their family, and some company can't really afford to do it, so they'll pay them 25 cents a day to expose them to the utmost horrors that we would say, no one should ever see these kinds of things. And they're watching it on repeat over and over and over. And you're like, do you think that's okay? Like, well, no, I don't think that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
well, then
so
let's move on that.
yeah, and I think that's kind of where I want to go next to the conversation was I think you brought this up when you were talking to Sean McDowell about this on YouTube.
Yeah.
I put the link in the chat. I'll put it in the show notes later, but you were talking about and I was thinking about this as well, about this argument of, well, if there's more AI porn, then there's less people being exploited, right? There's not you don't have these actors,
It's a logical
actresses in
argument.
there. Yeah, like it logically comes up because we don't
Mhm.
really know what goes into AI. It's like this magic thing. So it
Yeah.
it's like, hey, it just comes up. But you were
It
talking,
just happened in 2022. It just became a thing, and you're like, yeah, that's how it works.
yeah. So talk us through that a bit. I think you said train the model.
Yes,
Can you
yes,
describe more about like what that means, and then
sure,
bring that into the context of like what you were just talking about
sure.
with
So
pornography
most
and
people,
all that?
yeah. So on this one, most people don't realize how AI is created. They think it's all autonomous. It's just machines, you know, doing machine things, and then magically it comes out the other side. But that's not the way it works. Because again, AI is designed to be used by human beings. And the problem with AI, especially since deep learning started happening in 2017 and beyond, we suddenly had to start shifting the way AI was trained, because it no longer was, what do you want it to do? It was, it'll do everything, and you've got to tell it what not to do. Well,
Mm,
that changes the game for how you have to train and build AI models, because now instead of going, well, we just want it to play in this space, it doesn't work that way. It goes, it'll do literally everything that it's ever seen or experienced in all of what it's been trained on. And when you think about the fact these AI models have literally been trained on every piece of data that has ever been created in the world, you can begin to think about some of the things that it has in its brain, that it is capable of, that it has seen, that it has observed, that it knows, okay, the patterns, I recognize that when this happens, then this can happen. You start to think about that being built into the brain of these AI models, and then going, okay, well, now we need to just set it out in the wild. Yeah, right. So somebody has to sit and go, is this acceptable? Is this not acceptable? Is this acceptable? Is this not acceptable? And that's a human being. There's a human
mm,
being that is being exposed to that. And it's not one, because when you think about all the data in the world,
right,
you need
right.
thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people that are just sitting, staring at a screen going, is this okay? Is it not okay? Why
Gosh.
is it not okay?
And what's
Go
their
for it.
moral compass as they're looking at it, right? Like, are they Christian? What do they believe in? Do they have, is there an operating procedure to say, okay, step six, if it is this, this, and this, not okay, So
And you'd
then it's
like to
like,
think these things are all well baked.
right.
But when you start coming into the complexity of, there are things AI is thinking about that we haven't even thought about, because we're like, oh, I never put those two pieces together before. And it's like, well, it did once back in 1608 on this one dot, and you're like, holy crap, like I didn't think about that. And so companies have to start thinking about that. And yeah, to your point, you're now asking other people to go, well, here is the SOP. Here's the guidance document for what's okay and what's not okay. Well, that might be fine when you're asking people to say, what's a cat? But when you're starting to say, is this violent?
Mm,
Hmm. Well, what is violence?
Right.
Well, when is violence okay? Like, what level of violence? Is this too gory? Too gory according to who? According to what? You get into a level of detail that is just like, well, now somebody's watching videos of horrific torture and murder, and oh well, that's obviously too far. Well, but what if it's not real? What if it's actors acting that out? Is
Right.
that too far? Like, well, the model can't necessarily distinguish between the two, so somebody's got to try and help it determine how far is too far. And people get hurt. You look at all you got to do. There's a website, I can't remember what it is, but if you just Google exploitation of data workers, it,
That down.
you don't have to look very far to see how people are being psychologically tortured to train this stuff. And
Yeah. Yeah.
so you start going, this isn't harmless what we're doing. You can say, well, I can just talk to a chatbot and it can interact with me and it's totally fine. And you're like, is it though? Because what went into training that chatbot? And when you start asking it questions that are pushing the boundaries, somebody has to now figure out whether that's an okay conversation to have. And so as kids start interacting with their favorite cartoon characters and developing relationships with them, and the relationships turn into sexual relationships, somebody's now got to sit and figure out, well, where do we draw the lines on this? Is this okay? Well, who's involved in it? How far did it go? Did they cross this line? Did they cross that line? And people get sucked into this far more than people realize.
Yeah, and just to relate that, I think just to the porn industry, I wrote recently about the porn industry being a predator. I think that was an article from about a month ago, and I finished this book called Takedown, which is a great book. Definitely recommend it. But this lady, Lila McElwaite, she basically started to investigate Pornhub and more specifically how it's user generated and there's no guidelines, or there weren't. Now there are more guidelines coming through on verifying consent, verifying the age, right? Because what changed the porn industry was when Pornhub and these companies started to basically kind of just pull off the guardrails of how porn's generated and created, to
Yep.
where basically you could just film it on your phone and you can upload it. So what she was seeing, what she uncovered, and what she was able to actually get into the legal realm was the fact that Pornhub was monetizing videos of rape, of
Yep.
trafficking,
Yep.
of just the most horrific things. And they had when I'm trying to remember the exact number, but I think it was like less than 100 people on their staff to go in and review, is
Yeah.
this, is this person underage? Is this person doing this with their consent, right? And you'd have to at least get multiple, like over 20 flags from the community. And these are people watching it, or from the
Right.
victim themselves putting this, hey, this is me. Like, I want this taken off.
Yeah.
And they didn't have enough people. Because when you think about how big this industry is, right? And how much content is produced
And the demand
and the
is
demand, right?
massive.
It's
Yep.
massive. So I just bring that up just because Pornhub, they got in massive legal trouble.
Yeah.
They removed 90% of their content. I think that was back in 2023 as a result of this work. So again, the book's Takedown. I wrote an article about it that summarizes it, but just it shows, maybe just to bring it back to like what you can do, it shows how one person, she was able to get in there and investigate this and write about it, get the right people involved. I think Bill Ackman got involved.
Yeah.
He's one of those billionaire activists. He got involved, and Visa, MasterCard, these companies remove themselves. I would say not willingly at first.
Yeah.
They had hesitations, and they definitely knew what was going on, and they still were a part of monetizing this stuff. But eventually, with enough pressure, they removed themselves for where they don't, like, you can't use your Visa anymore if you're looking to buy content or sign up
Yeah.
for a subscription there. But I just think about that example, and that's just the porn industry. But now we're bringing in this new layer of exploitation, which
Yeah.
is, I would say, when if you've ever created AI content, I laugh about it just because when I first started to do it with my friends, we were doing like celebrities holding fish. And this
Okay.
is back when AI like wasn't that great. So I actually cherish those images I created because it looks like they just fished out of like right behind a nuclear
Yep.
facility and the
Yeah.
fish look all crazy. But we were creating these images. But now it's like everything is so realistic that now people can go in and, I mean, if you want to talk about that a bit, like
Yeah.
just the
Yeah.
level of what
Well, and I
people can
think
do.
that's where people going back to this training data. Okay, it's consumed everything it's ever seen. And we all can think of like the AI generated images where it's like, well, there's the hands, they look ridiculous. You're like, what?
Right.
Why is it making hands that look like that? It's like, well, because it doesn't have enough images of hands and it needs more images of hands. And so when you start thinking about the adult content, you're like, well, people aren't going to be happy if the AI generated stuff doesn't look correct. And so you're going to need more images and videos of that thing to train the model to be able to do it and to go, well, now we've got to create more of these things that we have to then feed the machine. And now the demand for this, because I mean, I think anybody who's ever struggled with porn knows you're never satisfied with where you are. Like it's just
Right.
this constant push to push the limits. Well, that means you're going to need more extreme content to train the models. Well, somebody's got to make that content because it's got to be made somewhere. Somebody's got to now review that content that you didn't plan. And it just keeps feeding this. And then you start treading into other territories. I was in a conversation once before with somebody where it was like, well, what about kids? Well, what about kids? What do we think about that? Like, is it actually, are you actually, is it pedophilia if you're only engaging in AI versions of it? And you're like,
Oh,
well,
geez.
what? And you start getting
Right.
into the AI ethics standpoint, and it's like, oh, we got to have this conversation now. I just thought we could never talk about this. And you're like, well, we do. Because if AI is going to get involved in this, and AI will do whatever you tell it unless you guardrail it off, it means we've got to say, well, then what is ethical? What is human? Is it actually a human that
Yeah.
it's creating when you're doing, and you're like, holy crap. And if you just look at the trajectory of what the porn industry has done to people, and then you go, well, now let's throw AI on it, and I'm sure it'll be fine. Well, it's kerosene on a campfire. It's just going to go. And we're getting into humanoid robotics that like literally are designed for this intent and purpose. Why get married when you can have an AI robot that looks, acts, and behaves like a wife that does whatever you want? That's got to be great, right? I mean, that'll be your dream come true, right? Until it literally destroys you. And all these things that we've gone, we're never going to have to talk about this. Yes, we do. We have to, because if we don't, the AI will just do it on its own. And it's an alien intelligence. It does not have context. It does not understand the implications of what it's doing. It just is doing what it thinks you want it to do. It doesn't care about you. It doesn't care about your mental health. It doesn't care about whether humans end up destroying itself. It just wants to give us what it thinks we need. And yeah, it's serious. It's not something to just take lightly and go, well, isn't it better for people if they can just create AI generated stuff instead of going to a site? No, it's not. It's not better at all.
Oh, man. It's a deep, deep conversation. I'm so glad to have you on, and I'm so glad for the people listening right now. I really appreciate you all listening, and it's a heavy subject. I think porn in itself, as I've written about it and talked about my story and talked to other people, it's already heavy. But I think you bring in the AI aspect of it, and I think, like you were saying before, it can quickly exacerbate things, and it can quickly amplify things, whether amplifying it for good or for bad.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a sobering to talk about sobriety. It's a sobering thing to think about, of just how far it can go. I mean, I remember I was at the gym like it's like a month and a half ago or so, and I started to talk to this guy. We were at the heavy bag. If you ever like want to find some male friends, just go to a gym and start hitting a punching bag really hard. And I swear, I think I've gotten like 10 guys, like just cool dudes, phone numbers, to just hang out or whatever, just
Yeah.
from hitting a heavy bag. But I was talking to this guy, and we of course, how I am, you get to know me for a little bit, and then I start talking about porn. And we were talking, and he was telling me and how he was at his sister's place, and he saw his niece on the phone, and she was just glued to it, and he was trying to talk to her, and she just really wasn't responding. So he just picked up the phone, looked at it, and she was looking at like cartoon characters, that it was pornography, right? And she is 9.
Yep.
And I think that's why there's a lot of reasons I'm really passionate about this and
Yeah.
fired up about it.
Yeah.
But I think if a lot of people, if hopefully, if nothing else can really change your mind on it, is the kids, man. Because
Yeah.
you were talking about your story and how you started as a kid. I was 10, pretty similar to what you were talking about. That's pretty. I was at a friend's house, and that's how
Okay.
I first saw it. I just think about kids now and what they're exposed to, and how I think when we were exposed to it, it was still not good and still traumatic, things that we shouldn't have seen. But I just think about now the level of
Yeah.
just depravity and trauma. I mean, heck, you can't even go through most of social media without seeing something incredibly graphic, either sexually or with violence. And if you're like on X, I mean, heck, there was times where it's like you couldn't go a day without just seeing someone get like murdered on your feed. And it's just like,
Yeah.
what are we doing here? Like, what
Yeah.
are we exposing our kids to? And I think that's an important thing to talk about. And I think it should hopefully resonate with anyone that has kids. Like, I don't have kids, but I'm already thinking about my future kid,
Yeah.
and I'm thinking
Well,
about
and the
them
thing
because I
about,
want to protect
what's
them.
funny is with this, sometimes people just feel hopeless about it. Like I'll talk
Yeah.
about this and they just go, "Good grief, Christopher." Like after hearing you talk about this, like
Right.
I don't even know what to do with it. And I'm like,
Hmm.
it's actually a lot simpler than you realize. Because when you start talking about it, we start opening the door for conversations to make people go, okay, well, maybe I can't change. Maybe I'm not like Christopher. I don't sit on these AI boards who can say, no, as a company, we need to say we will not let our technology be used for this. Period. I can have that influence. Maybe you don't, and that's okay. You don't have to be that. But what you can do is go, well, but I can start talking about it like you. I'm at a heavy bag talking about something, and suddenly you realize that it's not quite as culturally celebrated as we like to think. We tell ourselves that so we feel better about it. But I remember when I was in college, I worked construction. And these were some of the roughest people I have ever been around. And I
Sure.
was in New Orleans for a summer. And I spent summer on Bourbon Street. And at the time I was, I what's funny is I as much as I've have a very unique past, there's only been ever been one woman I've ever been involved with, and that's my wife. And I remember when I was down in New Orleans, the guys, these rough and tough guys, they just they would just razz on me all the time, be like, "Come on, like, take a girl home. Like, how do you, whatever?" And I'm like, "No, no, no, I'm not. Like,
Good for
that's not
you.
who I am." And I remember they would just, for a while, when we first went down there, they would mock me, they would tease me, they would make fun of me. But when they saw that I just was like, yeah, I mean, you guys can make fun of me all you want. Like, you're not getting anything of value. I know you think you are, but I know you're not. And I would be really open about the conversations with it. And I wouldn't go, I don't do it because Jesus says. Like, I would just be like, I see what you guys get. Like, there's nothing satisfying about what you go sleep with somebody and then you're miserable the next day because you don't even know their name. Like, yeah, that sounds real appealing to me. And I would just be straight with them,
Right.
and it did not take long before they started opening up to me about how they hate this. They
Yeah.
hated it about themselves, but they had been conditioned to believe that this is what normal is. This is what you're supposed to do. As a guy, you're supposed to feel this way. As a guy, the more girls you've taken home, the more manly you are. And when all of a sudden you finally find somebody that goes, that's a lie and you know it, and I'm not judging you for it, and I'm not sitting here looking down on you going, I've never done it. You're
Sure.
disgusting. But actually going, I see what you're in and I don't want it. And honestly, I had one guy who was like, at the end of the summer, I still remember this because he came up to me crying and he's like, I am so sorry for trying to drag you away from being ethical and for
Mm,
actually caring about women. He's like,
yeah.
he's like sobbing. He's like, I can't believe I tried to force you into that to make myself feel better about what I was doing.
Oh man, hit the nail on the
And
head
I
right
remember
there.
being like, it's okay, man. It's
Yeah.
okay. It's okay. I'm not judging you for it. I get it. We've all been conditioned. And so going back to this, just having conversations about these, being open about the fact that nobody's looking at porn and going, this just makes me a better person. And I really wish more people knew about it. And I've talked to people who've been in the industry and they're like, I hated every day of my life. It was miserable. I was empty. I was hollow. But I had lots of money to fill the void, to tell myself it was fine. Everybody told me that I was the apex of progress in society, and this is what real freedom looked like. And I was a slave and I hated it. But they're afraid to talk about it. They're afraid to admit that. They're afraid to be honest about what they're really going through because they're afraid that everybody else will look at them and go, what's wrong with you? When
Yeah.
really, society's going, feel the same way, but I don't want to be the one to say it. And so that's where fighting against this is not about how do we ban every adult website on the
Yeah.
web?
Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
How
Yep.
do we
Yep.
shut down AI? Like,
Yeah.
no, how about how do we just have honest, raw conversations and
Yep.
share our stories with people? Because real transformation starts in your heart. And once
Beautiful.
your heart starts transforming, suddenly the people around you start transforming. And I just think, like I said, I've got 8 kids. My oldest is a boy and he's 14. I'm not repeating the sins of my father. We
Yeah. Beautiful.
talk.
Yeah.
We talk about it. My kids know when they're old enough, they know the struggle daddy has been through and the lengths that daddy goes to make sure that that never becomes part of my story again. They know that it's real. They know all the things that are coming after them, garnering them for their attention. We talk about where it comes from. And the thing is, I would have never talked to my parents. And
Yeah,
my kids
man.
talk. They
Yeah.
talk about it. They're like, "Daddy, like, what do you think about this? Like, what is inappropriate? How, why does it matter?" Like, they know this. Even my daughters are very concerned about wanting to make sure that they do everything they can to protect their brothers and other men as they grow up because they don't want to be a stumbling block. And not because they've been shamed into thinking your
Yeah.
body is disgusting and you need to cover it. No, no, it's because they
Yeah.
genuinely care and they understand the impact that they can have and they want to be a force for good. And it all came from just talking openly and honestly with one another.
I love that. Absolutely love that. Because I think that's something I wanted you to share on this podcast is like for all the parents out there or people like me that want to be a parent someday is how do you address this and it speaks so you spoke so eloquently about it and it really goes to the root of it is just talking about it and talking about it with honesty and also just having a space for it, right? Because I think that was something that I never really felt. uh, I think for when I look back at my childhood, I think I love my parents. They're fantastic. But we never really I feel like I never really had that sex talk, as much with them. And I feel like that if there would have been more of a conversation, more just knowing that it was there. And of course, those are things I think parents probably tell kids is like, "Hey, you can tell me anything." But I think probably when I look back at it, like at my dad, I'm not sure like really if he had much of a concept about how like the environment that I was in,
Yeah.
where what I was doing. And I feel like just like you were, when I think about my future kid, I know I can have that conversation because I was there and I understand it. And I have a it's almost like you have to develop, it's like learning a new language. You have to understand how the language is spoken sometimes to
Yeah.
have that conversation, you know?
And it's
So,
something you have to
yeah,
build. It's something you
yeah,
have to build. I mean, that's one of the things that I think, you know, I won't get into too many details, but like I didn't learn this from my parents. So for me, it's just been a
right,
journey of discovering what, and that's where scripture's been so helpful because I look at how Jesus treated people and how he spent time with the outcasts. And it's not because he was trying to get in with them or try and, you know, impress them. And it was because he wanted to really understand what they were going through. And so, like, I think of with my kids, like, I deeply care about them and I
right,
respect them as equal human beings. Yes, I'm in a position of authority right now because as children, I have an authority role over them, but that's going to change. And so they're equal image bearers to me. And I want to understand them, the way their world works, the things that matter to them, what they're dealing with. And I want to come to them on their level, not come down and go, you know, when daddy was your age, this is what it was. I want to sit with them and go, what is it like to be 14 today?
right.
What kinds of things do you encounter? Tell me about it. Invite me in. Let me participate. And I always thought, because of my growing up, I thought my kid would be like, get out of here, dad. Leave me alone. Like, I don't want you around. And that's not the case at all. My kids love when I join their Minecraft servers. They think it's like the coolest thing ever. Dad comes in and like, I don't even know the language, but like I can come like jam with them and all their friends come hang out. They're like, oh my gosh, your dad, you know, he's here. And it's not to be the cool dad. It's because I want to understand them. And it opens dialogue. My kids tell me things that I would have never told my parents. And my wife too. They talk to both of us just because they know, look, yeah, there's going to be lines. And when you cross them, there's going to be responsibility and accountability. And you know that. But it's not because we're here to punish you. It's not because we're here to make you into another version of ourselves. It's because we deeply care about you the way God cares about us. And we're
Mm,
here to help you not make the same mistakes we did. And hopefully, not make mistakes we probably never even would have known existed had we not gotten to know you. And I think that kind of stuff that doesn't happen because you follow some checklist, you know, make sure you go out with your kids once a week, or it's like you got to find the rhythms. But yeah,
that's fast. And so how young is your young, so you said your oldest is you said 14,
yeah, my
and then
youngest is
how
7 months.
congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, and
That's
people
so
always
cool.
ask, they're like, are there duplicates, triplets? You know, is it a blended family? I'm like, nope, nope, just a whole line of 8 kids. And what's funny is we weren't sure we wanted kids. I had some serious trauma growing up, and I didn't want history to repeat itself. And growing up in the church, I'd always heard the sins of the father. And so I was like, oh my gosh, like,
Yeah.
And my wife had her own stuff. And so we were really on the fence. And it's been funny how God has just kind of gone, no, you don't get to decide. I'm just
You're
going to
not on
keep
the
giving them
fence,
to
man.
you.
That
And I'm
that that
like, are
fence
you
is long
sure?
gone.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's like, well, okay, you obviously see something even we don't see, but it's truly been a chance to, and I feel like I learned more from them than I could ever teach them, which has been really healing for me as a dad to go, oh, this is what it means to love like a father. This is what
Mm,
it means to care and love unconditionally and to, you know, so I can relate now more to when God's like, I'm here for you.
yeah,
Yes, there's
beautiful.
consequences, but I love you and you don't need to keep running from me. And I promise I will walk you through where you're going because now I'm like, I never experienced that, but I know what it is to feel that and to have that desire now for 8 human beings and go, there isn't anything you could ever do that if you came and told me, I would go, oh,
Right, right.
really? yuck, I get out of my face, get out of my face. And then to know, and I'm imperfect. So if I can experience that and God's perfect, well, then I never need to be afraid to come to him.
I love that. And that's something too that I think was a big turning point, I think, in my recovery. And I think a big thing that I was going through when I was going through the divorce process and incredibly depressed. Uh, one of my Bible study leader, Trey, love the guy. I remember we were on the phone and he was just saying, like, Mac, like you are loved by God, and he's like, nothing that you did is unforgivable. And we started to talk just about different characters in the Bible. And I always remember that, and I always tell guys that is like, if you feel like you're unforgivable, open up a few pages and read.
Just read the heroes of the faith. Like
Just read a little bit.
Jacob is my favorite biblical misfit. The fact God did not give up on that man is beyond me.
Or like David
And
and what he did with Bathsheba and like her husband, like basically sent him, I think,
Abraham, I mean, they
yeah,
exploited an Egyptian slave for kids. And you're like, God works through us in spite of us. And he's, like I said, there are consequences for our sin.
exactly, yeah,
Absolutely.
right,
But that doesn't change his love. And yeah, yeah, which I
yeah,
think
and
love casts out all this stuff. And I think that's where
right,
even this topic of things, it's like most people I talk to who have struggled with porn, they've really struggled with being loved. They've struggled with feeling love, and they've been convinced that they can satisfy some sort of need through this. And it's just enough. It's just enough. It's not quite what I really desire. It's not quite what I want, but it satisfies me. It gets me through the day, and it's like God has so much more for you than that. He's got so much
right.
more for you than that. He doesn't want you to just get by. He wants you to be overflowing and outpouring in abundance of love. And but he can't. You're blocking him off when you're like, no, 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 just leave me over here and let me have my table scraps. Like, well, okay, is that really what you want?
Yeah, that made me think about, and I don't think I have the verse off the top of my head. I think it was in Luke where Jesus, I think it was the woman that washed his feet, I think. But there's a quote that really speaks to me. I'm going to paraphrase it, but it's basically, "He who hath forgiven little, love little."
Yeah,
If that strikes a chord with you. And when I remember that came up in one of my Bible studies, I think it was like last year with the guys. And what I really thought about that with like porn recovery was, I think I couldn't really even forgive myself. And that really restricted the kind of love that I could provide, my wife at the time, to other
yeah,
people. And then when you dig deeper into it, it was really, I wasn't really trusting that God could forgive me ultimately.
yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
And
we
then
think we think we're doing a good job. We think we're doing a good thing, like by holding on to this. We're not.
yeah, and once you accept that forgiveness and lay yourself at his feet, lay yourself, I think, just if you're secular as well, just to be humble and to open yourself up to, hey, this is out of my control right now. Like, I need help. I think that was a huge thing for me. It really, 6 years ago, it really got me started on recovery, was actually going to a Christian therapist.
Yeah,
And I started listening to this podcast called Porn Free Radio. Remember, I went into the mountains and I fly fished for a whole weekend. And I listened to about 20 to 30 episodes of Porn Free Radio. I
yeah,
prayed. I was reading the Bible. I think I also read Jocko Willink's Discipline Equals Freedom. So it was like this, I strapped myself up to this weekend of just separating myself. Yeah, like my ex at the time was like, you need to just go,
yeah.
just
Detox.
get out. And I went with my dog Bo. My grandparents, they built this cabin up in the mountains in Colorado, and I went there for the weekend and fly fish, journaled, was with my dog, listened to the podcast, read the Bible, all these things. But really, it was this experience of just opening myself up past what I thought porn was,
Yeah.
this, I guess, this selfishness as well, and just opening myself up and humbling myself to, hey, there's like a whole other world out there that you can experience, but you have to address this thing in your life. You have to root it
Yes,
out.
you do. We as a species hate looking in the mirror. And I'm convinced that's why James specifically says, when you look in the mirror of God's perfect law, like there's a reason he specifically calls that out, because he knows that is the only way you can actually change, is to actually accept and see what's really there. And we put filters over our mirrors, we cover them with sheets, we walk away, we stare out windows so we can point at everything else. And what we really need to do is take the filters off and just look in the mirror and go, oh, I hate what I see right now. And then take it to God and go, I hate what I see. And he goes, I know you do, but I don't.
Right.
I don't. I don't hate anything about what I see in that mirror, because you are perfectly and uniquely designed in my image. Have you been twisted? Have you been corrupted? Yeah, but you think I haven't seen this before? You think I haven't worked through this? You think I didn't know all this? You think I'm going to be disappointed that you think I got a raw end of the deal? When I made you? No, I didn't. I knew what I was signing up for. I got you. Like that, there's so much healing in that. I do a ton of executive coaching, and um, so many of these leaders you see that are just destroying companies, and when you really get them behind closed doors, they're wounded people
Yeah.
who have spent years building up walls and protecting themselves from who they really are afraid they'll see when they look in the mirror. And yeah, it sucks. It sucks if you haven't looked in the mirror a long time. It's like if you are really disciplined about your weight and what you eat, and then you stop weighing yourself for like a year and stop stepping on the scale, and you quit working out,
I've
and then
been,
all of
hey,
a sudden you step
I've
on and
been
you're like,
there.
whoop, like, oh, like you're like, oh my gosh, how did I let this happen? And you're like,
Yeah, yeah.
but God's always
So
like,
I
it's
wasn't
okay
step on
though.
the scale. Yeah, yeah. It's
Yeah.
okay.
And it's like, but it's okay. Like we can work through this. Um, and it's never too late. Like that's the thing. Like I said, I grew up in a funeral home, and I watched people, we far take for granted how much time we have.
Great point.
When
Yeah.
I say life is tomorrow's not guaranteed, I've seen way too many people think they had tomorrow and next week and next month and next year. You don't. And AI can tell you, yeah, well, we'll fix that for you. We'll fix. No, it won't. It won't. You're gonna die. And sometimes that's what it takes to finally realize that maybe I should look in the mirror before that happens. Because yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Uh, wow, that's beautiful. Yeah, I talk about that sometimes, is like when I was going through my divorce. Tomorrow's actually going to be the 2-year anniversary of it,
okay,
which is just a good time to reflect on things and how far I've come since then. But I remember my grandma passing away, and that was 2 years ago in February. And at the time, right, I was separated from my ex, and we were going through all the legal stuff, and it was just so sad. I was in a really sad place because I was married for 5 years, and then we dated for a few years before that. So I had this whole life that I had ahead of me, and then abruptly, I mean, over time, right, the decisions that I made affected that, but
sure.
when that decision came up that, "Hey, this is happening," it was really tough, and I'm still processing a lot of it. I still probably always will, it's just such
Probably
a
process for the rest of your life. We have
yeah,
this
and I
idea. We have this idea that grief
yeah,
gets, you're over it. You're not.
yeah, and, but one thing that changed me, it's crazy, and you're talking about death, was I was really floundering for a little bit when after we separated, like, with porn, just felt
Yeah.
like I was just doing a nosedive, and it was actually Valentine's Day 2 years ago when my grandma went into the hospital, was on Valentine's Day, and I remember at the time, I, I think my at the time, I think I was actually, like, watching over the house where my ex was living. I think she went on a trip, and I was just taking care of the animals and stuff, and I got a call that she was going to the hospital, and, we called her Saint Anne because no one had any negative memories about my grandma. She My aunt said the worst thing my grandma ever said to her was to go play outside in a stern voice, which is actually not bad advice. But why I brought that up was I was struggling, but that I remember that day I actually committed with my mentor, who's actually a pastor. He has a podcast called Finding Traction and Pastors
Yeah.
on Porn. Vern Tomke, he's a great guy. I remember that day was a day that I put some accountability software on my phone, my laptop. I recommitted, and that was before I got this phone call that my grandma was in the hospital.
Okay.
So then I drove from Colorado Springs to like the Denver area, and something that changed in me was all the people that were in the room. My mom's side of the family, my parents have been married for over 35 years. My mom's side is a lot of them live pretty close in Colorado. My grandparents were in Wheat Ridge. That's where my mom grew up. And you're from Colorado, so you kind of know the area. But they were at the same house for like 65 years. And my grandpa owned a printing press for a while. And then a lot of my uncles and aunts worked in printing, and they still do.
Yeah.
And they would stop by my grandma's and grandpa's house like every day to get a beer to talk. That's kind of the vibe that was in my grandparents' house. A really tight knit. They always
Yeah.
had an open door, very safe place you could go, no judgment, and just the greatest stories and connection, great food, all that stuff. And when I was in this hospital room, all of the family was there, and I have a big family, so you couldn't even fit everyone in the same hospital room.
Yeah.
And I think that changed something in my heart because I really thought about how do I want to be remembered? How do I, like you were saying, we our days are not promised to us, so how are we going to live our lives? And it really changed me deep inside. And then she passed away 2 weeks later. I was a part of, we would take shifts. I wasn't as involved as my mom was because my mom works
Okay.
in nursing, so she was really involved. But there was like 2 nights where I went there and I actually, was helping out with my grandma and making
Yeah.
sure that she was cleaned up and all that stuff with my cousins. And that really made me really introspect and think about life on a different level when I was really thinking about, okay, like when I'm older, when I'm her age,
Yeah.
am I going to have this family that's taking care of me and that loves me so much? Or if I keep going down this route with porn in my life, in this isolation, this disassociation, this destruction, what is that gonna look like when I'm that age?
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
is it, you know?
No, well, and what's funny about this is, and this is where growing up around death shaped me very unique. Because I think sometimes we say, well, God knows all, he sees all. We kind of like, yeah, 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 sure, but he's God, whatever. And we can dismiss that and we're like, but he's got grace and mercy and forgiveness. And so we'll make excuses for why we won't change these things about ourselves that we hate. We know they're terrible. We hide them. We shroud them. We do all this stuff. And maybe we can get to a point where we're like, well, God will overlook it. He'll forgive me for it. Um, but one of the things that growing up in a funeral home was, I mean, I've been at more funerals and visitations
Mm,
than probably anybody will in multiple lifetimes. Um, and what I can tell you is every secret you think you are hiding will come out when
mm.
you're dead.
Wow,
Whatever
okay.
you think you have hidden, whatever you think nobody knows about you, whatever you think, I pulled it over, it comes flying out. And the quality of the relationships you built, the things you did when nobody was looking, the things you thought you're no longer there to kind of hold back the tides. And they all come crashing in. And the worst part about that is I've seen it devastate so many families and so many
Mm,
people when the truth about who dad was or who mom
yeah.
was comes flying out, and now you're not there to explain the context or to help understand or to say I'm sorry or anything. You're gone. And so when all this stuff comes crashing out about who you really were, I've seen it destroy families. I've seen it you had to call the police I mean, it's crazy what can happen with this. And then people's real feelings about you start coming out. You can surround yourself by people who tell you you're wonderful and you're smart and you're great and everything about you is the best. And then when you're not there, all the stories of I hated that for they're a jerk, nobody's at the funeral, or the people who are just there to spit on your casket because they're like, finally you're gone. And it's like,
Mm,
is that the legacy you want to leave? Because you're leaving a legacy
regardless.
regardless. You don't get to say, well, I just won't. Okay, sounds good. Let me know how that goes for you. You're leaving a legacy, and it's going to be the legacy of who you really were, whether you want it to be or not. And I think for me, that has always shaped me. And I, like I said, I've got plenty of major mistakes in my life. I mean, I
Sure.
won't tell the story, but like I got dragged out of Bible college by federal agents my freshman year. So like I've got I've got things in my past. But one thing that growing up in a funeral home taught me was, man, like I just don't ever want, because I don't know if it's going to be tomorrow or next week. I really want to make sure I'm doing everything I can to make sure, like, I'm trying to do and be the best version of myself. And not because I'm afraid God's going to zap me with lightning, or I'm afraid how people are going to judge me, but because that's just a harsh reality. And yeah, I've seen too much, and you can't unsee it once you've seen it.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, because you could be in incognito mode, you could be deleting your history, but as we know, that will come to light as well, either in your life or after your life. And yeah,
Somebody's going to
the
have to go
just
through your phone. Somebody's going to have to go through your devices. Somebody's going to have to go through your email as they're doing all this stuff. All those secret passwords you thought you had, all those things you thought you were hiding, all this stuff that, the relationships, the Snapchat threads that you thought nobody would ever find. Somebody's going to find them. And yeah, and it's terrifying to think that that could happen when you're not even there to try and some people might be like, well, good, then I'm dead. It doesn't affect me. It's like, really? You want to destroy the people around you that way? You care that little about the people around you that you would let their lives be devastated and have them second guess you for the rest
yeah,
of their lives? No, you don't want that. You don't want that.
yeah, that's I think, and maybe I know we're at 2 hours already, but
I
which
know
is
we're just going.
I'm like, "Man, this could go on for yeah, I probably gotta jump off in a bit.
Yeah,
Actually
no
heading to the
worries.
mountains for a little 4-day weekend, but, I think that really is a good place to end, is, like, thinking about your legacy, thinking about, because I think we covered so much, and again, really appreciate your time. This has been fantastic talking with you. I knew it'd be great, just getting to know you and stuff. I knew we'd have a fun time. So I really appreciate you being on, but I think
Yeah,
that's like a important place to leave it, right? When I think we're talking about technology and we're talking about all these advancements and how concerning it is. I think ultimately, right, it's all about you and what you're doing deep down inside in yourself. Like that's kind of where the key lies. Like the whole world could change, but it's still like up to you to make choices, right? And to make
yeah. You have far more
choices that,
control than you realize.
yeah, yeah. And I think that's an important, hopefully, a takeaway for people listening to this is if you're looking for solutions to if you're struggling with porn, it lies deep within you, right? And who do you want to be?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And and who do you want others to know you as? God and other people. And you can put on a mask and a veneer and try and pretend to be something you're not, but you will always be found out. And that's that's scary, and sometimes that drives people to just try and hide deeper. But I think what I've discovered consistently, time and time again, is the best thing you can do, no matter how deep you think you are, no matter how far you think you've fallen, you can always fall farther. And we have this horrible
Mm,
habit of going, ah, no, 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 no. But like, as counterintuitive as it is, surrender is the most freeing, rewarding, thing you can do, because then at that point, you've literally changed the trajectory of everything. It's a complete turning point. And I think that's where not only is scripture and salvation and all the things we see in the Bible, yes, it's religious, yes, it's supernatural, yes, it's all these things, but it is immensely, immensely practical and logical. It goes against our like best thinking, but you really start digging into it when you really start thinking deeply, and that's what I love about the deep work I do. The deeper you go, the more you go, oh. Oh, there's a design behind all this. Like he's just telling us how it works. He's not being this angry, judgmental God throwing lightning bolts at us. Like he's the architect, the blueprint of reality, and he loves us so much. He's going, here's how it works.
Hmm.
And we go, stupid instructions. Like I'm gonna do it. And he's like, okay, so
Yeah, and I think it fits perfectly into like the title that I was working up was reclaiming your code.
yeah,
And we're talking about ethics. It's like reclaim your code of ethics. Reclaim your code of who you are.
your
Uh,
identity.
Understand what your design is, right? And that I think we're constantly coding ourselves with the decisions that we make every day and what choices we make, right? Like we're building out the code. Like God knows what the code it looks like and how it goes. But
He wrote it.
sometimes, yeah, he wrote the code. Yeah. Which that's a whole that'd be an interesting topic to discuss at some point is like the
Yeah,
simulation theory kind of thing. I think that's really interesting. But I sometimes trying to like land the plane, I guess, with the
yeah,
podcast, with your talk. But I remember talking to someone about this was I think what helped me with porn addiction on my end was understanding like where in the code, like looking into myself and looking at the mirror, like where in the code was that that I needed to go in and look at and really
yeah.
reclaim. Like
Where was the
there was
glitch?
something there was something there that was glitching to where, hey, I got these programmed habits that I feel like I can't break free of. I'm just
Yep.
it's almost like I'm possessed, like I'm just going to these things.
You have malware.
And
I mean, honestly, the technology
right,
analogy play. You've been infected with a virus. You've been
right.
corrupted by a Trojan horse, and you've got to get a rootkit and like pull it out.
Yeah, and that only happens right when we can sit down and look in the mirror, look at the code, look at our code, and be honest with ourselves.
Right.
Because in I think the beautiful power about God and faith is how much more powerful it is than this power that we perceive that porn has over us or these
Yeah.
temptations, these fleeting desires. I think sometimes can believe that this cannot be overcome. This is too powerful. But when you
Yeah.
compare it to the power of God and to faith, it's not even comparable,
No. No.
you know?
It's not. And I think that's where it's going back to reclaiming what God truly made you to be. And that's where going back to the very beginning of your story growing up in kind of the Catholic side of things, where it's like, I think a lot of people see becoming a Christian as fire insurance, gets you out of hell. And it's like, God has so much more to offer you than a ticket out of whatever you think hell is. Like that's just such an understatement of what it is. But I'm familiar with being told that that's what it is. And it's just going back to your point. He wants to root out every virus and piece of malware in your code so that you can be exactly who he designed you to be. And you don't even have to look at Christians. I mean, everybody out now right now is trying to find purpose and meaning and what is it to be me, to make my imprint on the world. Well, do you want to make the imprint he designed, the one that truly will actually satisfy, or do you want to be the imprint that you're trying to hold together with rubber bands and paper clips?
Mhm. Well said. All right, sir. Well, I'm sure we could keep talking. I
Yeah,
think
I'm sure we could.
I
I can't
feel like I
believe
said
people
that
have
like
stuck
20
around
minutes
for
ago.
this long.
I feel like I said that like 20 minutes ago. I'm so terrible at that. I've done that
No.
before where I'm like, hey, we're gonna land the plane, and then it's like an hour later. Uh,
I know.
but yeah, I think just to close out, like where can people find you? I know we talked about at the beginning. I know some people hopped on a
Sure.
little bit later, but where can people find you?
Yeah, so I'm super active on Substack now. I mean, I've kind of created a landing point, christopherlin.co, which is kind of like, you're supposed to have a brand. So I did, when I went off on my own. And so that's where it was. Because before it was like, well, you can read my stuff on Substack, or you can follow me on YouTube, or I'm very active on LinkedIn. And it was very confusing for people. So that's just where it was like, well, you know what? You can just find more about me on christopherlin.co. And then that'll point you out to all the different stuff I do. And but yeah, I love engaging with people, like things like this. I love this kind of stuff. Just talking and getting to know other image bearers and the stories he's created in them, and how we can encourage and build each other up. Because we need that right now. We need
Oh,
that in the
big
world
time.
right now.
Yeah, we need to talk. We need to be honest, and we need to encourage each other. Encourage each
Yes.
other, and I think the collaboration that's been available on Substack's been really cool. Just to meet other. I think I was thinking about it. I was like, I've talked to more fellow Christians and priests and pastors than I ever have. I think that the ever since I've been divorced, really, going through that, it's like brought me so much closer to God and to other people. Because I think I had to look down at very root of things, right?
Yeah.
When you're torn
Yeah.
down and you're broken, you gotta find who you are in that and
Yeah.
resurrect yourself. So, and Christopher also has a future focused podcast. I've been listening to that. It's fantastic because I mean,
Thank you.
you're just talking about, like you said, every week things are just changing, AI space technology, and how does that affect us in the
And it's
workplace, human
scary.
experience? Yeah,
It's scary. And so my goal is, again, kind of like we said here, to build people up and go, I get it's scary, but here's how you can think about it.
yeah, we've got the power. We've got the power within us. So,
Cool.
Christopher, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks everyone for hopping on today. We'll post this later on YouTube, as well as get the full video out for everybody. But
Yeah.
yeah, feel free to
Thanks for having me.
support
Thanks for
this.
having me.
Yeah,
I've
yeah,
enjoyed getting to know you through Substack and all this other stuff. Super fun. Like you said, I can't believe here we are sitting talking 2 hours later, and it's like we can keep going. But this has truly been a blast.
right on, man. Well, hey, have a great rest of your day, and everyone listening, thank you so much. Keep fighting the good fight. Break free, stay free, be free. Talk to y'all later. Bye.